So as we're getting some of those questions populated, I'm going to go ahead and start right there with Scott Wolter. You know, Scott, a quick question since you're still fresh on everybody's mind.
Okay.
So we got to start right off with you. No chance to catch your breath or drink water. There are some who would say today in this modern era that philosophy is dead, and that ancient wisdom and esoteric wisdom is of no value in the modern era. Now, I would take it based on everything that we just saw from your presentation that you would probably disagree. Can you tell us, in your view, why is ancient knowledge, why is all this esoterica important to us today?
Yes, I would disagree that it's not important today. Of course it's important. And I think I touched a little bit on it that, you know, we all ask these big questions and we all self-reflect, and there's a lot of interesting ways that you can sort of address that. And I think that's important. It's part of learning, it's part of personal growth. And I think in the end, it makes you a better person. And one of the things that happens in Freemasonry is one of our goals is to make good men better men so that they can be part and help make a better society. That's what education, that's what learning is all about. And so I think that's, I mean, I think everybody should push themselves to learn. My God, once I started this work, I started looking at the calendar and go, I'm 64 now, and I'm not going to live long enough to learn the stuff. I just wish I would have got going earlier. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to finish it with this, is that we need to know the truth, because we can't go forward into the future intelligently until we know where we've already been. And it's a simple thing, we've all heard it, but it's true. So there you go, Micah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. I think this next question, I want to go to one that we are getting here slowly as they are now coming through. One for Andrew M.T. Moore. I've been fascinated with Dr. Moore's work since I had the pleasure of being able to interview him on the 7 Ages audio journal along with my colleagues Jason and James. Dr. Moore, being someone who has worked for decades within, you know, archaeology and actually having led one of the largest archaeological societies in America, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is, of course, there's mounting evidence for this, and yet it remains somewhat controversial. What do you say to your colleagues who are still slow to warm up to that mounting evidence?
The answer is a basic one: follow the science. And in my talk today, what I tried to show you was the evolution of my own thinking about this issue, where we had already, on the basis of the evidence that we'd excavated, come to a certain number of conclusions. We clearly didn't have the whole story then, but we had a good part of it. And then along came this new information about the Younger Dryas having been caused by a collision with a comet. And suddenly, things that were not completely understood seemed better to fit the new version, the new story, than the one that we had before. But all of this was based on an accumulation of well-tested facts. So where are we in the wider world now? Most of the information about this has been published in the scientific literature, so there's been a debate amongst scientists, geologists, and others. It's not yet fully understood by the archaeological community, of whom I am a member. So we have some work to do in translating the science into perceptions that the archaeological community will have an easier time dealing with. How's that?
Fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. I'll just add this also. You know, I think it's important as the scientific community looks at new information and studies things that may seem extraordinary and counter to our past assumptions, it's important to follow the evidence wherever it leads. I think the same applies to UAP, but then again, I'm a little biased. Ben, I want to come over here to you on one now, okay? Let's see, got to find my questions here. They're quickly coming in. Ben, are the interior dimensions of the boxes of the Serapeum proportional from box to box?
It's a good question. The interiors of the boxes are, in many cases, more or less perfect, right? At least the ones that we've measured with precision tools. Christopher Dunn's taken some, very expensive precision tools. We've also had guys like an Egyptian engineer, I think his name's Ahmed Adli, has taken tools and gotten measurements from a lot of boxes. They do seem, at least to the eye, to be proportional. There is some variation. Some of the boxes are also a little less finished on the inside. And in fact, we really don't know the answer to that. That's something we're trying to collect. It's like kind of a long-term goal. Kyle and Russ and I, given that we get the chance to go to Egypt, I go probably a couple times a year, certainly have for the last several years. And we are slowly taking the time to kind of do more documentation and try to do more measurement of these boxes and individually associate, which box in which alcove. You typically see a map of the Serapeum. It's all of those boxes, but there's no real good resource in terms of like, what is this individual box in what alcove? What are its measurements? What are its dimensions? Even, if you dig back through the surveying results, and guys even from Marriott's time, they didn't measure the boxes. There's really only measurements available for one of them. They do vary. So yeah, answering that question of are they proportional? Is the interior spaces the same? Those are things we're hoping to answer as we go forward. And we're collecting that data slowly, and that's definitely a goal as we go forward.
Excellent. Fantastic answer. This one isn't directed to any particular panelist, but I'm going to single out Dr. Sweatman. Maybe he has some information about this. Here we are again. And that was an excellent presentation you gave earlier, Martin. The question is, and if you don't have an answer for this, feel free to pass this on to another of the panelists, but one of our folks out there on the live stream has asked, have any of the panel heard of the Oans, who supposedly imparted knowledge to the early Mesopotamians, and does anyone have any theories as to their origins? Now, I ask you because about the handbags that you talked about in your presentation.
Spell that name again?
O-A-N-N-E-S, also Oans. Remember, this is this ancient tradition that in the earliest of times, these people would come, they would take no food, and they would come from the ocean, and they would impart, yes, these fish people, they had like a fish-like face above the face of a man, and that they would impart wisdom above architecture, mathematics, and things like this. Are you familiar with those legends by chance?
Vaguely familiar. It's not
Pardon
something
my
I've looked
synopsis.
into in much detail at all. I am familiar with some of the symbolism from that region, where there are these bucket shapes, pails. In my view, I can't really see them being strongly linked to the semicircular shape that I was talking about. I know both are described as handbags, but I'm not sure they're the same thing. These buckets seen on some of the sort of deities and the semicircular shapes, I can't connect them directly. Maybe there's a link there, but I don't know.
I think more explicitly probably the Apkallu and some of these other traditional figures, right, from prehistory. Now, as far as the Oans, does anyone else care to comment on that? We can move on if not. I've got a question for Randall then I think we're going to jump into here. Can we go through a solar asteroid storm, this individual asks, where we are getting thousands of asteroids, meteorites daily, but most are too small to see, but the energy still hits Earth and causes changes which may also affect the climate?
Well, certainly I think if it deposits enough dust in the atmosphere, that may have an effect. Outside of that, I've mostly considered things that are a little bit on a more macro scale and how that might affect the climate. There's so many factors involved in the climate that all of these things, changes in solar irradiation, changes in ocean circulation, moving positions of the continents over long terms, the Milankovitch forces, all of these things are working together, and I'm sure micrometeorite dust plays a role in there somewhere. But I couldn't specifically single it out and say it's this part of it of the changing climate is due to that factor. Now, I know that Fred Hoyle did some work on that, which years ago. So I'm a little bit vague on it, but when I was reading Chandra and Fred Hoyle decades ago, there was a book that Fred Hoyle wrote called Ice, and he had a theory of perhaps it was micro diamonds reflecting solar radiation. I don't want to try to speak on it unless I brushed up on the specifics of it, but it was kind of along those lines, that there was the accretion of cosmic material that could affect climate change to the extent that it might be responsible to at least some extent for the onset of an ice age.
Indeed, indeed.
But again, I'm not going to pretend that I know the answers to that.
Absolutely. Coming over to Mr. Collins for a moment. Of all the topics that we have addressed over the course of the last few days, in terms of what science most crucially must be applied toward, is there one that stands out to you? And if so, why?
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
Hard to pick.
No, I think there's a thread that goes through all of this, and that is follow the data, the facts, the evidence where they lead. And just, why would anybody be worried about the facts, the truth? I've never understood that. And so, I've gotten into my own little brush-ups with colleagues and with the archaeological community because of some of the things that I've done. But it wasn't my fault. It was just where the archaeology led. I couldn't make any. If someone can come along and give me another explanation, and we've heard that several times here, but it's just follow the evidence, be as critical as you can about it, and but when the evidence takes you somewhere and there's nowhere else to go, then by all means, don't be afraid to embrace
And
it,
it should
no
be-
matter what your colleagues think.
It should be critique, not dismissal.
Yes,
Right?
That's
A
exactly.
critique is
exactly
fair.
right.
Dismissal is
Yeah.
intellectually dishonest, and we
I
see.
mean, I have flipped
a tremendous
views
amount of
on
dismissal.
things that I believed and I held 25 or 30 years ago, and I've done 180s on some of that. Because of the evidence. Just go where the evidence leads. That's all I can say, and without being too complicated about it.
Indeed, yes. Follow that evidence wherever it may lead. Although I'm moderating this panel, I'd like to give a hand to our fantastic host, our moderator, Jahannah. She's done such a wonderful job this entire weekend. And well deserved, my friend. This next question comes to you. Being world traveler that you are, and of course well-traveled, and having explored so many ancient sites, what is the most intriguing thing that you have found? What stands out in your mind, if you can pick one, and why?
The statue of Sekhmet that's hidden, it's locked away in Karnak Temple in Egypt, because I didn't know about it. I had no preconceived idea about it. I was purely going to look at like drill marks and saw marks and all of the tech. And I had like all of our group who went into this normally closed off temple at dawn in the morning. You're supposed to go in, and everybody had a very weird experience. And all of our tech, a lot of people experienced cameras were freaking out and not working, and the geotag on people's iPhones was going all over the place, and we experienced something that I was like, where's the science, what's happening? I don't, but I got an idea of what the ancient world, I always thought it was weird that people would worship statues and like hold so much reverence in stone, and I kind of got a little smidge of what it was like. Maybe stone could actually contain, I don't know, some sort of like energy. There's a reason why they dragged that stone hundreds of miles. They did it for a reason, and it's got intense amount of quartz, like over 50% quartz structure. And I thought, oh crap, maybe they're not just like amazingly beautifully carved things. Like maybe they had some sort of visceral energy to them, and we kind of experienced that, and it threw me completely because I was not expecting it. So that was probably the coolest, most like woo-woo thing I've ever experienced, and I was like, okay, there's a whole other underlayer to all of this in the ancient world. So
A vibe, I think might be a word for it.
it was a vibe, definitely. And I had a question. When are we going to Mordor? Because I'm feeling like there's like a fellowship thing happening here.
Get those rings of power ready, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to climb into a volcano. Can't wait. I've actually done that before, no kidding, but anyway. Mr. Tankersley, I'll come over to you for a moment. That was an incredible opening statement that you made where you, actually in the appropriate language, acknowledged the Cherokee heritage here, the indigenous American component. Speaking on that point for a moment, what have you learned from your own personal experience with that, having learned the language and, of course, acknowledging the original inhabitants of this land? What, of course, does that mean to you, and how does that apply to everything that we're learning this weekend?
Good question, thank you. The language I learned from my grandmother, I thought she made it up. So It was a language just she and I spoke at home, and she said, never, ever speak this language outside. And most people didn't realize that it was illegal for Native people to speak their own language until the Native American or the American Indian Language Freedom Act, which was in the 1970s. By the time it passed, I'd already graduated from college. So, and I'll be honest, I didn't realize until I was out of college that she didn't make it up. It wasn't until I heard someone else speak the language that I knew it was a real language. But that's led me to a variety of pursuits. But what's interesting for me, it's come full circle. During ceremony, I've looked at the ground and I've asked myself during ceremony, how much of this could we excavate and interpret? Knowing, participating in the ceremony, the answer is none. And so where I went into archaeology because I wanted to learn about my past through science, well, now I realize I should have been listening to the elders.
Beautiful response, by the way. Thank you for that. Incredible response. Mr. Caverns, I want to ask you, because I happen to have some foreknowledge of a particular site you want to visit. Now, if you could go there, where is this? Why would you go there? And why is it of such importance? Here's a hint. I believe it's in Belize. Am I correct?
Yes.
All right. Where are we talking about, and why do you want to go?
Anywhere in Belize?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
You have to pick just one, though. That's the trick.
Okay.
And it can't be a crystal cave.
Okay, there's two places. I'm going to pick one. There's two uncharted jungles in Belize. You have the Orange Walk jungle, which is the area that's now called the Program for Belize. Coca-Cola was going to buy it and tear the whole thing down to make Orange Crush. And
nice idea.
and so Belize fought, they got it back, and they created the Program for Belize. This is in northwest Belize, but I think the place that I would rather go is, has anybody in here ever heard of the Blue Hole in Belize? Okay.
Show of hands.
So it's similar to a cenote, and I don't know the exact geological explanation behind it, but it's not exactly a cenote. It's more just like a sinkhole. Okay, well, there's a blue hole that's in the ocean. Well, on the same latitudinal line, further west inland, up in the mountains, there are other blue holes, but they're not filled with water, so they're given the nicknames the black holes. And every so often, people go out there and they take expeditions where they rappel down 500 feet into these black holes. And in these holes are caves where they found the real crystal skull that the Indiana Jones movie is based out of. And around these areas, it's likely that there are going to be villages and other cities that are even further south into the jungle from this massive, one of the biggest Maya sites in Belize called Caracol. So that is something in particular that I've never spoken about before, but I intend on doing that expedition or excursion in the future within probably the next 24 months.
And we all intend to go along with you, Luke, if we can. We need more adventure in our life. Mark, I got to come over to you here for a moment. You know, I mean, I have read most of the scientific literature related to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. You gave a very data-rich presentation yesterday morning. That was just incredible. Now, in terms of the proxy data, I mean, the physical proof that we have supporting what in likelihood you've characterized as a swarm, probably a scattering of objects that struck around 12,800 or so years ago. What evidence stands out to you and why?
Well, I've got to say, probably the platinum at the moment is the strongest. There's no volcano eruption around that time, and it's truly a global signature. And these sort of things are used in other disciplines as geochemical datums, particularly like volcanic eruptions. And if we can use that geochemical datum all around the world to know we're looking at the Younger Dryas, then, I mean, that's the easiest way to find the proxies, and I think just definitely the platinum is the strongest.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Again, that platinum anomaly, and it's been found at so many sites. I've had the pleasure of actually working at least one of those sites myself as a volunteer. I think now we've moved through basically all the panelists and probably completed our round of questions from the live stream, and I see folks starting to line up with questions from this audience here present, and so I'd like to move in that direction now and get some folks. I think we've got microphones down there which should be ready and fitted, so if you guys want to step up to the microphone, we'll go ahead and get to some questions. Let's start over here on this side. And I will ask you, please, of course, try to direct your questions specifically to one of the panelists. Although if you do have something general and you're not sure who to ask, that is okay, just let us know, okay? Let's start right here.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the speakers, thank you to the organizers, and thank you to the attendees also for just encouraging critical thinking. Mr. Wolter, the other day we were talking and I'd asked about if you could comment on sort of the disappearance of Barry Fell's ideas from the pre-Columbian transatlantic, and you said you had some thoughts. We didn't get to talk about it though. Could you just talk about the disappearance of where he went wrong? So
Yeah, well, okay, I'm just going to tell the story quickly. When Jackson first got the document, and he, I just glossed over that he got it deciphered. It was encrypted. He got it deciphered. One of the places he went to get help was to Harvard and Barry Fell, and Fell helped him. And I don't know all the details. Don would probably know better. But when Fell realized what this document was, he wanted it. And he wanted to include it in his book, America BC, which he deserves a lot of credit for. He was one of the first academics to come out and say that there was diffusion, there was pre-Columbian contact, and he went into great detail about it. And of course, when he realized what this Templar story was, he was all over it. Unfortunately, he wouldn't give it back. It's not a smart idea to do it to those guys, to Bill, and he got it back. But what later happened was when they were up on the Temple of the Goddess and they were looking for this Altamara's tomb, Jackson knew enough, or Fell knew enough, and he, as part of this, when he got the money back, he had to sign an agreement, and he didn't honor that agreement, and he ended up taking a bunch of students. It was sort of like a fake school field trip study project, so he could try to find what he knew was up there. The problem was he was on the wrong side of the mountain. In any case, after they found the tomb, they took all the artifacts out, and then they left an inscribed stone inside. Fell eventually went over there, and he deciphered the message, and it was not a nice message. So I actually tried to contact his son, Julian, and because Fell did find an artifact in the cave, and we haven't seen it to this day, I contacted his son thinking he might still have it, but I haven't heard back. So, but we all make mistakes. We all do dumb things, and that was a dumb thing that Barry Fell did. That's the story.
thank you.
Excellent. We'll come over here now. Go ahead.
Thank you all again. Excellent works. I kind of have a general address. There seems to be a gorilla that is missing from this conference, or a gorilla in the room. That is the warming cycles, the exit of the Younger Dryas. I hadn't heard anything that speaks to the massive spike in temperature and what will have brought forth the balling Alarad and or the end of the Younger Dryas after the nuclear winters that we would see from these impact proxies.
I'll take that one because it comes up in these things a lot, and it reminds me of when I go on these adventure tours. I took a good friend from Raleigh who was kind of new to the stuff but fantastically interested, and we're several times in the first couple of days he goes, okay, what's the deal with this? And I said, hey man, it's a mystery tour, right? You just learn better questions. You don't have the answers. We wouldn't come over here if we already had an answer. You know what I mean? So you got to give us the free board to not know what the hell happened. You can't explain everything. We do not have a theory for everything. It's a good thing when you get a bunch of people like this because you can cover a lot of different mysteries and give credible answers to them. But I've never heard anyone feel certain at all about or provide any evidence at all for the mystery of the end of the Younger Dryas. And I find it just as fascinating as you do, but there's nobody you can call that has the answer to that. So that shows really the lack of research, the lack of interest, that you can't find anyone in the world that can explain the most sudden climate jump in our history. Fortunately, we found evidence for the beginning of it. And I know that ultimately we'll find the answers to the end. But we got to be patient, and you got to realize if you find somebody with all the answers, you found the wrong person.
May I shine light on this topic and hopefully spark more examination of it?
Exactly.
The NGC 7293, the Helix Nebula, is the closest planetary nebula to the Earth. It's only 600 light years away. It is dated, calculated to have gone nova transition 9,000 to 12,000 years ago. That infrared and radiant energy would have arrived 600 years after that. Its location, as referenced from Earth, is in the Aquarius constellation, which is recognized as the fox symbol in Göbekli Tepe. There's a pillar in Göbekli Tepe that has fire shooting from the belly of that fox, which is the exact region of the nebula.
Thanks for that, mate.
There's also a series of...
Okay, we'll look at you for next year. Okay? Seriously, we're going to have
Cat's Eye Nebula and the Helix
JV
Nebula.
round.
Check them out.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's come back over to this side. We'll get this next question in. Go ahead.
I'm not sure who this would go to. I'm thinking maybe Dr. Swetman, but probably to the group in general. If you look at where the sighting of Göbekli Tepe is, speaking of that, it's just at the northern entrance to what looks like about a 15-mile wide flood channel, like a sheet flood. And there are some erosional looking effects north of it as well. I'm wondering what Dr. Schmidt based his assessment that it was buried by the people and not, covered over by debris from a relatively minor flood.
Dr. Swetman?
Yeah, so I think earlier on, as you said, Klaus Schmidt, I think at the beginning of the story was that perhaps these enclosures were intentionally buried. I think more recent evidence from the excavators tells a different story, which is in line with what you said, which is that there are these enclosures. Probably Göbekli Tepe is a settlement as well, with houses, and over time, houses get built upon houses, and we see this in other sites as well. This is where you have the tells that build up. These are layer upon layer of housing. So if this happens at Göbekli Tepe too, then eventually you'll have layers of housing that are kind of overlooking and crowding the enclosures. So all you need is like an earthquake, as we've seen, or perhaps a heavy storm or something like that, and you can get a landslip into the enclosures. So this is the more recent idea that at least the initial part of filling the enclosures was just perhaps a natural accident. And then it's not clear what happens after that. Perhaps they're just left and the debris accumulates, or perhaps once the enclosure is found to be, it's come to its natural end, perhaps then the people did decide to fill it in. But nevertheless, the thinking now is that the initial filling of the enclosure was probably just a natural accident.
Excellent. Before we go to this question here really quickly, Denise Reyna also had one for me about what happened 6 months ago that started the ball to make everything happen we've been hearing about with so-called alien disclosure. Does it have to do with the Space Force coming out? I don't know about that. I can only say that this has really actually been a topic that's UAP, been bubbling for many decades, kind of like a lot of the geological and archaeological research that's been discussed on this stage over the course of this weekend. A lot's happened since 2017. Watch in the weeks ahead, probably a lot more to come. Let's come back over here to this guy. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for your presentations. I've learned so much during this Cosmic Summit. Thank you, George Howard, and I think I'm going to direct my question to you, sir. This whole time, it's been such a wonderful experience, and I think I can speak for the whole audience that we can all feel a little bit weird being here. And it's been nice not feeling weird. It's been nice.
Amen, brother.
It's been nice feeling...
Peaks rule.
It's been nice feeling normal, but we know what's going to happen when we leave.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to talk about all the wonderful things that we've learned with our friends, with our neighbors. And so maybe just to get to the point, My mind is on growth. How do we grow? And I'm thinking, how do we form things like local chapters?
That is a great question to the point where I could have planted it, okay? Because I've got an answer.
Could it be?
That before we had the setback, we had some plans underway, and we had to kind of pull things back and straighten things out and reprioritize. But our social media guru and I have worked out a fully fledged plan to have a global community of people who have like-minded interests along these lines. And we're actually going to form a group called the Cosmic Circle. And the Cosmic Circle will have a Discord. I hope that there's enough room with some of the other Discorders here that we could have one too. And we're going to have regular communications. We're going to have, I don't want to call it a podcast, but kind of an interview series, if you will. And I hope to do meetups as well. I think that's an absolutely essential part of this. And I've had people reach out to me in Raleigh and say, you know, just in my own town, because they knew I lived there and they were interested in the subjects, hey, where can we get together and talk about this? I want to talk with other people. So there really is kind of a yearning for that. And I think we all recognize exactly the dynamic you're saying, that it can be a little lonely holding these opinions. It's not lonely on the internet. You can have all the fun you want. But it's nice to sit down in person, have a beer, and talk about the information that, you know, share the information you have and learn from others. So there's going to be a future to the summit where it's 365, right? And then we get together in meet space, and we're talking the other times too. And I think there's room for it. And I'd like everybody here, and of course you'll receive communications about it, to consider joining the Cosmic Circle. It is going to be proprietary, for instance. The Discord is going to be a part of what paid people get, but we're going to make it very, very affordable. And it's not to make money, but rather to contribute to the cause and make this thing self-sustaining so we can make it bigger and better and bigger and better. Thank you so much for the question. It's called the Cosmic Circle.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing more and hearing more about the Cosmic Circle. Right over here, sir, please.
Yeah, I guess, Randall, inside one of the spherules, there's an eight-sided, it seemed like, and you guys on the cosmography, I think, talked about the end of the planets, a couple of end of the planets, and you're trying to figure out why were they eight-sided, or when you looked at the end, there was on one of your shows. But I wonder if this is one of the divine numbers.
Well, as someone interested in geometry, I've been very interested in the history and use of the various polygons, and I've always been attracted to the eight-sided polygon, the also called the octagram, which is an eight-pointed star that you can draw by connecting alternate vertices in there. And of course, I realized the Templar connection years ago, so I was very much interested in that. And in building work, it's a departure from your typical rectilinear figure, but it's quite easy to lay out and work with. So mostly for those reasons, there's in Freemasonry, it is important. There is a similar, it's called the octagram, and it's a way you can draw the eight-pointed star. It's the method is you do not lift the pencil from the paper, and you create this star. And I've used that quite frequently for logos and things like that. And I've built a few octagonal buildings, and so I just really like that. I mean, I, of course, like all the geometric figures. They all have their own properties to work with, but it's just a very clean, rational figure, easy to work with. I love the pentagram, and this is what I really enjoyed Scott's talk. And when he asked about if anybody knew the origin of the pentagram, I didn't raise my hand, but at least 15 or 18 years ago, I actually worked with an animator, and we did the entire sequence of the 5, 8, and 13 years. And somewhere in one of my old computers, it blew up, and it was maybe the animation was just too much for the old hard drive to handle. I don't know, but it was very disappointing to me to lose that, and so I've been wanting to redo that now. And of course, our animation capabilities are much better now than they were 15 years ago. But whenever I showed it to people, it was very, very impressive. I would say, watch this, here's the orbit of Venus around the Earth and the Sun, and the whole thing that Scott was describing. You'd play it out and people would watch it, and then the way I set it up was like as if the Earth and Venus were connected by a rubber band. And then they're going around, and as it's going around, you see the pentagram begin to appear out of this sequence. And it was quite impressive. So one of these days soon, and maybe if somebody who has those skills, we could redo that. I think Hunter, if you're out there, that's something we could talk about. Yes, Hunter, we could do that if you're interested. And it's very impressive. So,
On the issue of the people getting together, it'd be nice if we could do something towards the future. Something as grand as possibly an autonomous submarine going into the ocean, looking for Atlantis, or building a schist bowl.
do you have access to a submersible?
No, I think we should buy one.
We're going to get right to work on that, in fact. Thank you for that question. Let's come back over here now. We've got time for a few more. Go ahead.
Thank you for the event here.
I think we just had a mic drop. In the very most literal but unintentional sense. Sorry about that. Go ahead, sir.
So thank you to all there. And
could you step just a little closer to the microphone? There you go. Yeah.
Thank you all. Dr. Tankersley, a follow-up. I understood that the demise of the Hopewell culture was attributed to the comet, or the extraterrestrial explosion. Could you explain exactly how that, or in some detail, how that impacted them and led to their downfall, or the end of the culture? Thank you.
That's a great question. Just a real quick reminder, Hopewell is named after a Civil War individual by the name of Mordecai Hopewell. So there's no such tribe or Native American group named Hopewell. They're actually ancestral Algonquian people that Scott was referring to. But in terms of impact, again, what would happen if that magnitude of cosmic event happened in Washington, D.C. right now? Or what happens...
Might not be a bad idea, Ken.
Yeah. But it would have profound impact on our economy. It would have think what COVID did. Or consider a moment, Krakatoa. Here in North Carolina, there was no summer. When a little tiny island blew its top. So you can imagine a cosmic impact. People survived. There's no evidence that anyone actually died. But having that event happen in their social, political, and economic structure would have been devastating.
Food for thought. Right over here.
Look, you have seen my research, and LiDAR is expensive. Do you feel that my technique into finding ancient ruins would be much cheaper?
So, for anybody who hasn't met this guy, his name's Jesus. He showed me, he showed myself and Scott and several other people some pretty fascinating things on Google Earth. Some things that I'm not even a little bit remotely aware of. He's connecting lines to geoglyphs that are in the ground, and sometimes people do something like this and they connect the Nazca or Palpa lines in the deserts of Peru to ancient sites across the world. Like I think maybe one of them connects to Easter Island and the Great Pyramids and maybe closely Petra or something like that. But this is way more specific. He's connecting geoglyphs that are pointing in specific directions to other geoglyphs that are also pointing back at that direction on different sides of the planet. And he showed me dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of this. I don't know how I can connect that to LiDAR, but I think that if you were able to push that research, I think that there are definitely parts of that, something that you're onto, but I'm not 100% equipped to answer that. Would you like to say something?
I'd like to say something, yeah. Yeah, and Jesus, you're definitely on to something. And actually, you guys remember that alignment to Kensington, right? Well, the alignments that he's making really make that look like child's play. But we did talk about a different Templar alignment that was in Bornholm, and I showed it to him because I learned about it in a book I read by a colleague, and we started to plot it out, and it was pretty much right on. And then he zoomed in to one of the churches on Bornholm, and he goes, "Oh, look at that." And there was what looks like a standing stone site right next to this church, and I had no idea it was there. And so, yeah, I've always known that these long-range alignments were there, but I mean, you're taking it to another level there, dude. It's on steroids. So
yeah, Jesus, I've got to say, I didn't see as much of your call it presentation or theory, whatever you like, as I would have liked, but many did, and you were lead candidate for the JV team for next year, okay?
Get him on the squad. Sign him up.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And we're going to try to include some more of that. I'm kind of thinking about, for lesser known theories and people just trying to get their ideas out there, kind of have more of a lightning hour where you have 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. Yeah. And, do that for a couple of hours and maybe review people's, have abstracts and have a little editorial control and say, hey, this is some interesting stuff. Let's work this in. Absolutely. Right?
What if it's not interesting?
They ain't coming.
We have people who can help with that.
But
Guys, I think we've got time for a quick final question. Then we've got to kind of wrap things up. Let's go right over here. Quick.
All right, I'll make it brief. This is for Scott. There was an interview with a man named Timothy Hogan on Gaia recently, claiming to be the Grand Master of the Templars. And he went into a line of talking about the Ark of the Covenant, saying that the Templars were in possession of it, and it was an alternative power source, and that they had either acquired or else managed to replicate secondary arcs. Is there any legitimacy to this guy or what he's talking about?
There's legitimacy to Tim for sure. He is the Grand Master of an order that I belong to. In fact, next week I'm going to start filming a series with him for Gaia. He and I are co-hosting this series. So we are going to be talking about the Ark, and I guess I'll just wait and let the rest of it come out when it's ready. But there's more coming on that subject matter. So, and one thing I will say, and this is interesting because I've had conversations with Tim for many years, and there's a page in the Cremona document that I did not go into. There's a lot that I didn't talk about, but on one of them there is a page that has a connection to Egypt on it. That's all I can say for the moment. But what we think this page is telling us is how to make an ark. And according to the other documents we have that are not related to the CDOC, they talk about multiple arks. And when people ask me about the Ark of the Covenant, what I say to them is, I think the secret of the Ark of the Covenant isn't where it is, it's how to make one. So I'll just leave it at that.
I love this fact about Tel al-Amam, and this might be out of place at really what's going to be the very last thing said before I make some closing comments. But Tel al-Amam had the best second act of any archaeological site in history. After the destruction occurred, Dr. Collins, speak to who showed up there 700 years later on the hill behind us as we dig.
Yeah, well, a couple things happened. Moses showed up with the Israelites.
When you dig at Tel al-Amam, your back is at Mount Nebo.
Yeah, your Mount Nebo's right behind you.
Yeah, it is the beginning of the promised land as you look to Jericho.
Yeah. It's actually listed on the Egyptian map lists of the 18th and 19th dynasties.
That's right.
It becomes the site of Abel, and which, by the way, the word Abel, the name of the site before it was destroyed, Sodom.
Yeah.
In Egyptian, it's Shutu. Okay, it's right over the top of that site. After the Middle Bronze Age, after that destruction event, the Egyptians changed the name of the site on their map lists to Abel. What does Abel mean? It means to mourn a catastrophe.
And then Moses showed up.
Moses shows up around 1400 BC.
And it's well known that that very area, Abel Shittim, it wasn't known as Sodom, but it was known as the last camp of the Israelites.
And notice the name. Yeah. They came onto the plain of Moab at Abel, place of mourning, Shittim, of acacia trees. And by the way, back in the time of Joseph, a couple of hundred years earlier, it was known as the threshing floor of Atad, which is a rotten translation of the Hebrew. It just means, should say, who names their kid Atad, which means sticker bush? Oh, he's so cute. Let's call him Sticker Bush.
There's a story behind this.
And so,
it's my middle name now.
What it actually says, it's a flat, stony place of sticker bushes. Yeah. Okay, if you talk to the soil scientists on how fast an area that's been really denuded, by that kind of event comes back, well, when Joseph shows up, a couple 100 years later, 100 years later, it's starting to regrow sticker bushes. And then when Moses shows up, it's called Abel Shittim, which is a stickery tree. Mm-hmm. And then 700 years after the destruction of the airburst, probably Solomon built a store city, the Israelites built a store city on the site with barley storage, not wheat, because the area was also 6 times salted. It got really salty from the Dead Sea salt thrown up over the landscape. It took a long time for that to dissipate, so they started with barley, and they never got to wheat at our site, but barley will germinate in a slightly more saline soil than wheat.
Is it in your view possible that when Moses parted with the ark, because he didn't go into the promised land, right?
Yeah.
That the first place the ark would have been placed would have been where?
Yeah, this is interesting. The ark wound up. We know where Moses' command camp was. By the way, we found the building.
Okay.
It's called the House of the Desolation, Beit Yeshimot, House of the Desolation. Now, if you built a house, a literal building, freestanding building on top of a big hunking pile of ruins, might everyone around the area call it the House of the Desolation because nobody lives in this area except those people living up there? Probably an Egyptian customs house, because inside of it we found balance scale pans and all kinds of stuff for transacting business. What were they doing? Because even though all the cities were gone, the trade routes still coursed through that area. And so Moses and Joshua probably got up to the top of that hill because it was a strategic site.
You could see
Jericho,
Jericho
360.
Clear as a bell. 9
They
miles
probably
away.
looked at that building and went, we're going to commandeer that building. I want to stay there, not in a tent. And so they commandeered the building. And but where would the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle have sat? The lower platform is a large 500-meter across circular platform, flat as a pancake.
Yep.
The command camp was on top, but overlooking probably the Levitical encampment where the tent was, where the tabernacle was, and the Ark of the Covenant inside of it. And what's at ground zero at that location? Somebody asked earlier, when something was sacred, it's always sacred, a location. I don't know if the Israelites knew it or not, but when they pitched the Ark of the Covenant, put the tabernacle on that location, we excavated that location. And what's underneath it? Several superimposed temples from the Middle Bronze Age back to
Steve,
the early Bronze Age.
I look forward to talking more over our dinner. But I tell you, it really says something about the profundity of a particular location that someone can speak to it for an hour and leave out that, in their opinion, it hosted the Ark of the Covenant. Just a footnote at the end of the day.
Yes,
Shots
and on that
fired.
note, indeed. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'm going to cap this with one thing. It's very fitting that we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant here at the end because it reminds me of something my friend Randall Carlson said a few years ago. The sum total of all that we've been discussing this weekend is the modern Grail quest. I think the Grail can mean many things. It can be represented in many ways, but I think we've all kind of partaken on that quest a bit this weekend together. Awful glad to have you all along for the ride here in my hometown. Let's hear it for our panelists. Let's hear it for our audience. And before we wrap up, we're going to let old George Howard here say a couple of final words as the final closing remarks of the Cosmic Summit 2023. One more time for George Howard here. Yeah. Oh, damn fine. Right this way.
As we all have in many generally business settings, have sat through a lot of PowerPoint shows in our life, right? How's that for a PowerPoint show, right? Just extraordinary. You know, the people in this room are an intellectual family. Every family needs a home. This is your home. And we're honored to have you here. You know, if you take everybody that at one time paid to come to this conference, it comprised 46 states with just 550 people. You know, that's kind of difficult statistically, right? 14 foreign countries were going to attend an inaugural conference in a 2 to 3 flight town. Yeah, you know, they don't say a lot. But, it's not surprising to me because our subjects have a very special quality to them, and that's that they're equally relevant to every person on earth. Our subjects have no regionality to them because comets don't pit countries. We all share it. Many of you have been very kind to thank me personally, and that's very gratifying. But this conference was going to happen sooner or later, sometime or another without me. Someone was going to do it. Someone had to do it. And if that someone had invited this crowd to one of those pit houses that Dr. Moore showed us, y'all would have gotten on camels and come to it, right? You didn't need... But I'm lucky and I'm privileged to have had the life circumstances and timing to do the obvious. Bringing these people in this room, that's an easy call. There was no magic there. The magic was already existing. It just needed to be gathered. Let me give some thank yous. First of all, of course all the speakers, but particularly Jahannah and Randall, they had a lot to lose by sticking with this conference, and it could have gone the other way. It could have collapsed, frankly. And it was pretty apparent to me right away that there was no chance of that in their regard. Let me thank the Crown Plaza. The food was great, right? And the bartenders, extraordinarily patient, because we swarmed them pretty good. And I'll tell you, what a compliment when the manager of the banquet team says, everybody loved this. You could see these folks, when they had a moment from their normal work, they were listening. And it shows you that everybody likes this stuff. It's just a matter of getting through the information wall, right? I'd also like to thank, obviously, fantastic job done by Chad Stewart and his firm XL Media, arranging from the big picture. The AV and the stage and the lighting and the sound. And a new buddy of mine, Mr. David Davis of AVL Media, who has been very, very patient and is really hard to rattle because you always can get rattled in these kind of things when things are going wrong. Very, very important to me to thank the folks at HowTube, right? Mike Robertson and Shane Mosley are great people. Any kind of business planning would have suggested to do this on Vimeo or some similar platform, correct? We went with HowTube. I had my questions, and they were unjustified. And I'll tell you why. Vimeo wouldn't talk to me at 10:15 on a Friday night like Mike Robertson would at HowTube. And they weren't going to take a call Sunday morning at 10 when I was sweating something. They went absolutely above and beyond in assisting this conference, including all sorts of things like graphics and, just things that they didn't have to do. I'm going to miss some people, but I want to make sure to also thank Beckett Fusick, who's behind the social media. And I'll tell you, we had over 7 million people interact with the social media around this conference. And I'll be frank, behind the scenes, what you do with that is you actually collect that data, and then you can advertise back to them. And we're going to use that not just for future summits, as it'll certainly be used, but also perhaps in the employ of the Comet Research Group, and just give it to them for free. And if they want to, for instance, advertise a GoFundMe or similar type operation, we now have the people worldwide who are most intensely interested, and we can make that information available to them if they care to contribute. The event organizer told me, my first event organizer told me right away that she had managed my industry conference for 25 years, and I'd been to them for 25 years and went to the very first one, and this was the first one I skipped. But Ms. Carlene Baylor, who y'all don't know, was tremendously helpful to me as the organizer of my industry conference and a longtime friend to kind of show me the ropes, right? Ioannis Lazaropoulos in Greece was my freelancer who worked his ass off on this stuff. Maria Atkins came in with us late. Carlene knew she couldn't be here from the beginning, so we knew we had to transfer event organizers. And I want to thank Maria Atkins for hitting the ground with us late and picking up, and she's improved this conference immensely and did a lot of work around Asheville the last week or so. So thank you, Maria. And a good buddy and fellow parent at my son's boarding school, I board these guys in an August dad's trip. I'm starting this conference. And a guy named James Jernigan was a tremendous shoulder to lean on because he'd been in such businesses. And many others who assisted me above and beyond the call of duty or what I deserved. Finally, got to thank Pam, right? Anybody that can handle a spouse's midlife crisis as adeptly as she does deserves a big thank you and a big kiss, and I'm going to give her one. Okay, now down to just kind of some program notes, or one particular important one. We're going to do a survey, right? One of those survey monkey things or whatnot, and we all get them, and sometimes you fill them out, sometimes you don't. I got a feeling that everybody will participate in this. And although I'm going to be kind of tired and, laying on the beach, within 48 hours, I'm going to find some time this week to complete the survey that I've already drafted. And it's going to go out to you all. And I want you to answer it honestly, but also with the knowledge of how important those answers are. And any detail that you can provide to those that require a narrative will be deeply appreciated and helpful for both the financing and promotion of the summit moving forward. So keep an eye out for a survey, and thank you very much for filling it out. Let's talk next year, okay? Well, Pam and I agreed right away, hey, let's make a decision right now. What do you think? You want to do it again? And she said, oh, hell yeah, we got to do it again. The good news is, before we hit the pause button, we were very well along in planning the next one, okay? So we're going to start booting that thing up starting tomorrow morning. I'm getting a set of dates from potential venues, one in particular, and we're going to make this thing a lot bigger, a lot better, and we're going to add components like having lesser known figures be able to come and offer their ideas and theories. I think we should have an educational component where people stay an extra day and go do like a deep dive with Randall on sacred geometry. Or maybe, Chandra Wickramasinghe could give a couple of lectures, and extended to, who knows who we'll find, but I think there needs to be an educational component that would also be optional if you don't have the days, but stay another day for an educational thing. But ultimately, we're going to make this thing bigger, better, and most importantly, we're going to make it self-sustaining. So we don't need anybody. We got everybody we need to do this. We're not going to let it get hijacked by any kind of corporate stuff, but we're going to make it a big force for understanding. So here's the kind of closing idea. We can be a vanguard of paradigm change, and that is well underway. All of us can pitch in to complete the job. We began that journey this weekend, and we will not stop until our understandings of the past win the hearts and minds of the entire damn planet. And I think we'll live to see that. They deserve to know the truth that we know, and the 350 cultures and their storytellers deserve the vindication. Thank you so much for coming to the Cosmic Summit.